I'm sitting here with Fran. We were just talking about the topic for this workshop, humanizing the oppressor, and she's going to share a little bit about her background with us.
Hi, Susan. It's good to be here. I lived in a family that had 7 children. I was the oldest of 7, and I was the only one that was my stepfather's stepdaughter. All the other children were his biological children. He felt that entitled him to abuse me. For many years, probably 5 or 6 years, I was sexually abused. For a long time, I didn't understand why I was the one that was singled out. And it wasn't really until I was in high school that I found out that I was actually his stepchild.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that sort of clarified things for me a little bit. And I felt very guilty. I felt like it was my fault. I had done something to be singled out. And it was a really complicated situation because he was also quite proud of me in other ways. I was very intelligent. He liked to brag to his friends that I got good grades in school. I could have conversations with his friends on an adult level. And so it was very confusing for me for many years. And it finally got to a point where I was in high school and meeting other people, widening my circle. And I really started to realize that this was not normal, that this should not go on between a father and his daughter. And so I put a stop to it, and it caused a huge rift in our family.
How did you do that?
I told my mother what was going on, and it was devastating for her. She was a mother of the 60s, and so she didn't have any skills really. She didn't feel she could leave. And so we were both sort of trapped into this situation. And she still to this day has not divorced him. She's still with him. And for a long time that was a big point of contention with me.
Sure. So how did you cope with it initially after you did share the truth?
Well, I always was very close to my mother, and so I felt a lot of compassion for her, but I also had a lot of anger for her for not standing up for me.
Of course.
And so it was quite difficult for me. To be quite honest, there were times that I laid awake at night and thought of ways that I could kill him and get away with it. This is kind of interesting because a lot of girls in my situation ran away. They would run away from home. But I was very stubborn, and I thought, why should I run away? I'm going to make him support me. I just had a different mindset, even as a young person. So I continued to go to school and excel at school and moved on to college. And
did the abuse stop after you came out with the truth?
It did.
Okay. So then you must have had some ramifications later on because then you ended up seeking out help, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it just because it stopped, that didn't take away all of my confusion about why did it happen in the first place? Was I the outsider? His own children never had to endure this and all of that. When I was a young adult, I felt like it was time for me to seek my own answers and to come to some sort of reconciliation with this. So I went to therapy. And I knew that I was starting to date, didn't have healthy relationships with the people I was dating. I was sort of very dependent on their opinions, and I'd live and die if a boy liked me or didn't like me or didn't want to kiss me goodnight or whatever. It was like so unhealthy. So I decided that I was going to go to therapy, and I did for many, many years. Straight through a very unsuccessful first marriage, I continued to go to therapy and work on my own self. And I finally came to peace with the fact that it didn't happen because I did something wrong. It happened because there was something wrong with him. And when I realized that, that's what changed my life.
I see. And so now, you're on a second marriage with a loving partner and you're a mother yourself. And how do you kind of make sense of it all now?
Well, as I went through my own therapy, and as I started to really research my family, I learned that abuse really is very almost hereditary. It goes on in families for generations. And it really takes someone coming to a point of saying, this is going to stop with me. And I learned that he had been abused by his parents. They were alcoholics. They were very poor. So he had to work instead of go to school, and he had dyslexia, and they didn't really address that, and he was punished. So there was a lot of really unhealthy coping going on in his house. And he just translated that right on. You are what you learn. And I felt really bad about that. I thought, because he did have some really good qualities. And I'll just tell you a really interesting story. When I was married to my first husband, there was a time that we were really struggling. He had gotten Guillain-Barré syndrome. He was paralyzed for 3 months. And I was working, but it wasn't covering our bills. We were struggling for food and paying the rent and whatever. My stepfather came up to the house and he said, "Oh, guess what? I won the lottery." He played the lottery all the time.
Okay.
It was just one of his, he still does to this day. And he said, "So we're going to go shopping." And he took me to the grocery store and he bought us $200 worth of food. He paid a couple of the bills and whatever. I found out later that he hadn't won the lottery. It was just a way for us to save face. His personality was very complex, and I feel like he was a loving person, but he had never learned how to express it appropriately. And if you think back on what I said before, where he was quite proud of me, I think that I learned later, and I feel now, he never really learned how to express that properly. I'm not condoning the abuse in any way, shape, or form, because it hurt me deeply and it changed who I am, who I could have been.
Of course.
But I also don't hate him. He did loving things, but he did horrible things. And I think that's kind of true of all of us at times. None of us are really perfect. We do bad things, we do good things. Some things are really bad.
So how did you work through that anger? How did you go from the girl who was thinking about killing this guy to the person that you are now?
It was a lot of hard work. You know, people think they go to therapy and the therapist just fixes you. And you're a therapist, so you know that's not true.
Right.
You have to do introspection, and you have to examine your own life and your own, motives. And I just came to the understanding that forgiving him and seeing him as a whole person with flaws and good points and bad points was beneficial to me, because what he does really doesn't matter. He lives 2,500 miles away. He could hate me or love me, and it doesn't really matter. But if I don't forgive, it affects me. And, this is an old cliche, but it's really true. Hatred or all those things, it's the poison you drink and hope the other person will die. And so, I just realized it. It just, over the time of doing the work, it came to me that if I just forgive him for being a flawed person, that doesn't mean I love him. It doesn't mean I have this great relationship with him. I don't. We're civil.
What is your relationship like now?
We're civil. I don't voluntarily call him. But if I'm speaking to my mom and he's in the room and he talks to me, I answer him. I'm cordial, but I don't seek out encounters.
And did he ever own up, or? He's
apologized many times. Pretty much, it mostly started when I started standing up for myself. There was a lot of, first he denied that he ever did it, but then the proof was pretty incontrovertible. So he finally said he was sorry and he loved me and all this stuff. And
did that help?
No. Not really at the time. I couldn't hear it at the time. And now I do think he was sorry. I really do. Especially now that he's an old man. I think he looks back on his life and wishes he had done things differently. And maybe if he had been raised differently, he would have.
I'm sure. So back to the title of the workshop, Humanizing the Oppressor, it sounds like you've actually been able to do that.
I think I have. I think that if you can come to terms with this, you don't have to totally forgive the person, although I have. You draw your own boundaries and you realize that he's just a person, or she. I mean, women are oppressors too. They're just a person who has had their own maybe horrible things happen to them, and that's why they are the way they are. And again, looking at the complex nature of people, no one is 100% evil.
Right.
They're just not. So I think that it's kind of hard, sorry.
No. So, I mean, you work as a nurse, and so you're also in the helping profession and have a lot of compassion for therapists or any person in the helping profession who is trying to find the humanity in the oppressor. How would you even suggest that someone do that? Because I struggle with that.
I think if you go back to, I'll give you an example. I know a lady who seems to be miserable all the time. No matter what happens, she's miserable. You tell her she looks pretty today, she tells you, well, everybody should try to look like this. She's never seems to be nice. And my husband said to me one day, I wonder what happened to her to make her so angry. And I guess that's what you have to think about. People would not choose to be angry. No one wants to be unhappy, right?
Right.
So there's got to be an underlying reason for it. Maybe we don't know what it is, but it exists. Because at base level, nobody wants to be unhappy. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I hope I have the worst day of my life.
Right.
So there's got to be an underlying reason. And as a nurse, I try to look at that. Like, this family member is yelling in my face. Why? Like, what's the underlying reason? Do they feel guilty that they didn't take care of their family member? Do they feel like they might get sick like their mother is? There could be so many reasons. And so I feel like it's my job, almost like a detective, to get to what the underlying cause is, because people don't choose to be unhappy.
Okay, and then I guess my last question is, in our work with patients, it's a very kind of micro approach. But right now, we're living in a time where there's a lot of polarization, a lot of what seems to be oppression going on by people who seem like they lack humanity. So how do we exist in this macro environment, and how do we humanize those oppressors on a societal level?
That's a really tough question. And we all can almost become exhausted by outrage. That's really happening right now. So many people have outrage overload. The only thing we can really do, I think, well, obviously we can all contribute to our society by voting and all that sort of thing. But realize that you cannot control other people. You can't. But you can control your own environment. And so what I try to do is be as kind as I can on a daily basis. It's amazing how that ripples out into the world. It's contagious. People like being around people who are kind. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one of the best things we can do is emulate kindness and push back against that entropy, because we can't obviously go, to Washington or to the United Nations or whatever. We can't do that, but we can work in our own neighborhoods and our own families to just be as loving and as kind as we can.
And hope that energy kind of spreads.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen you do that, and you're definitely making it work. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Susan.